What happened to OTF Dede is a story so dark, so twisted, that even the streets of Chicago couldn't believe it was real. A setup, a kidnapping, and a night that would change everything. This is the kind of story you don't just hear, you feel. What you are about to hear is one of the most disturbing, most talked about stories to ever come out of Chicago's street world. A story so dark, so unbelievable, that even the hardest men in the city couldn't believe it was real. This is the story of OTF Dede, the night he was taken, the night they made him do the unthinkable, and the phone calls that changed everything. Stay locked in. This one goes deep. Before we get into what happened that night, you need to understand who OTF Dede is and why his name carries weight in these streets. OTF, Only the Family, is one of the most recognized drill music affiliations to ever come out of Chicago, Illinois. Built by Lil Durk, the OTF brand grew from the trenches of the South Side into a multi-million-dollar empire that spans music, culture, and street credibility. Now, within that circle, there are members who ride close to the throne. People who aren't just associates, they're family. OTF Dede was one of those people. A man who moved through the streets quietly, but was known and respected by everyone inside the circle. He wasn't on every song. He wasn't always in every video. But when it mattered, Dede was there. And that loyalty, that closeness to power, is exactly what made him a target. See, in the streets, the closer you are to the king, the more valuable you become as a pawn. And somebody out there understood that perfectly. Started like any other night in Chicago. The city was moving the way it always does. Loud in some places, quiet in others, dangerous everywhere. Dede was out, doing what he does. Moving through familiar territory. The kind of neighborhood where you know everybody and everybody knows you. But that night, something was different. Sources close to the situation say Dede was lured. Not snatched off the street randomly, but set up. Somebody he trusted, or at least somebody he didn't see as a threat, got close enough to him to make a move. And when that move happened, it happened fast. Dede was taken, grabbed, pulled into a situation he could not walk away from on his own. Now here's where the story gets darker. The people who took him weren't just trying to get money. What happened to OTF Dede that night goes beyond violence. It crosses into something the streets of Chicago had never seen. A kidnapping, a humiliation ritual, and a ransom demand that allegedly reached all the way to King Von and Lil Durk. This story is darker than anyone imagined. This wasn't a standard grab and ransom situation where you hold somebody, make a call, collect a bag, and let them go. No, these people wanted to send a message. They wanted to humiliate. They wanted to dominate. And what they allegedly forced Dede to do became one of the most disturbing details to ever leak from Chicago's street underworld. Now I need you to pay close attention here, because this is the part of the story that separates it from every other kidnapping story you've ever heard. According to accounts that circulated through Chicago street circles, the people who held Dede didn't just beat him. They didn't just threaten him. They allegedly forced him to consume blood. Let that sink in. Blood. Now why would someone do something like that? What's the purpose? In certain street cultures, particularly those tied to gang hierarchy, forcing someone to do something deeply degrading serves a very specific psychological function. It's not just about physical pain. Physical pain heals. But humiliation. Humiliation lives in a man's soul forever. Making someone consume blood, particularly in front of witnesses, is a power move. It says, "You are beneath us. You are nothing. We own you in this moment." It's designed to break a man's spirit. To make him feel like even if he survives, he can never speak about what happened. Because speaking about it means admitting it. And admitting it means the world knows what they made you do. For a man connected to one of Chicago's most powerful crews, this was an attack on more than just Dede. It was an attack on OTF's reputation. A direct challenge to Durk's circle. Word of what was happening began to leak. And it reached the ears of people who had the power to do something about it. Now here's where the story takes another turn. The people holding Dede didn't just want to humiliate him. They wanted to cash out. They saw an opportunity. They had someone connected to OTF, connected to Lil Durk, connected to one of drill music's biggest names, and they wanted to turn that leverage into money. So they made the call. Ransom demands were allegedly sent up the chain. To King Von. To Lil Durk. Now let's think about what that means for a second. King Von, at the time, rest in peace to a real one, was one of the most feared and respected names in Chicago. A man who did not move off of fear. A man who, if you called him with a situation, didn't panic. He assessed. He calculated. When the kidnappers made their demands to King Von and Lil Durk, they thought they held all the power. But what happened next turned a kidnapping into a citywide standoff, and proved why OTF is a crew you never test. He responded. The call reached Von. And by accounts that circulated, Von's response was not what the kidnappers expected. These weren't men who were going to crumble under pressure. These weren't men who were going to write a check and hope everything went away quietly. Lil Durk, one of the most connected men in Chicago's music and street world, was also made aware. When your family is in danger, you move differently. And Durk, for all the success and the fame, has never forgotten where he came from or who he's responsible for. The situation became a standoff. A dangerous, high-stakes standoff where the wrong move could mean Dede didn't make it out. And the people on the other end of that phone were gambling with their own lives, because they clearly didn't fully understand who they were dealing with. Now here's where the story gets complicated. Because unlike a movie, real life doesn't always tie things up cleanly. What we know is this: OTF Dede survived. He got out. How exactly that happened, whether money changed hands, whether people moved to retrieve him by force, whether negotiations broke down and he was released when the kidnappers realized the heat they'd brought on themselves, depends on who you ask. Different versions of the story circulate in different circles. Some say there was a payment. Some say the kidnappers released him when they realized they'd made a massive miscalculation in who they'd targeted. Some say there were consequences that were handled outside of the public eye, the kind of consequences that never make news but are understood by everyone involved. What is clear is that the people who orchestrated this situation underestimated the network they were poking. When you grab somebody from OTF, you're not just dealing with one person. You're dealing with a web of loyalty, resources, and street power that extends far beyond what most people can comprehend. The lesson these kidnappers learned, at whatever cost, is one that people in Chicago have been learning for decades. There are crews you can test, and there are crews you do not test. OTF is the latter. Stories like this one don't stay contained. They spread. They ripple. They change things. After word got out about what happened to Dede, the conversation in Chicago shifted. People started asking questions. Who was bold enough or reckless enough to make a move like this? Who had the connect to get that close to someone in OTF's inner circle? And more importantly, what happened to them after? To understand this story, you have to understand Chicago, the Chicago that shaped King Von and Lil Durk. A place where trauma is currency, loyalty is life, and every decision can spark a war. The story also reignited conversations about the nature of street life and what it does to people. Because no matter which side you're on, whether you're the one being held or the one making the call to retrieve them, everybody in that situation is carrying damage. Everybody is living with something. King Von spoke in his music about violence, about loyalty, about what it meant to move through Chicago as someone who had power and enemies simultaneously. His music was often described as autobiographical street journalism in melody form. If you listen closely to certain tracks, you can hear the weight of situations like this one reflected in every bar. And Lil Durk, who has lost more people than most men could survive losing, has spoken openly about the trauma of the streets and the impossible position of being someone who people depend on. When you're the leader, when you're Durk, every situation involving your people becomes personal. To understand a story like this, you have to understand Chicago. Not the Chicago of tourist brochures. Not the Chicago of deep dish pizza and the bean. The Chicago of the South Side. The Chicago of blocks where generations of families have been trapped in cycles of poverty, violence, and survival. In that Chicago, the street code isn't just tradition, it's infrastructure. It's how people navigate a world where the official systems, police, courts, social services, have consistently failed them. Kidnapping for ransom is not new in Chicago. It's been a tactic used by various factions going back decades. Grab someone connected to your enemy. Demand money. Demonstrate power. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it ends in tragedy. Sometimes it starts wars that last for years. What made the Dede situation unique was the caliber of people involved. When you're dealing with names like Vaughn and Dirk, men whose reach extends across cities, across the music industry, across multiple networks of loyalty, you're in a different category of danger. Before you judge Chicago streets, understand this. Men like King Von and Lil Durk were shaped by a world where loyalty is life, losses hit like bullets, and survival itself is a story worth telling. Most people in Chicago know this. The people who grabbed Dede either didn't know it, didn't care, or were desperate enough to take the risk anyway. And desperation in the streets is often more dangerous than calculation, because desperate people don't stop to think about consequences. We can't tell this story without acknowledging loss. King Von, Davon Daquan Bennett, was shot and killed on November 6, 2020, outside an Atlanta nightclub. He was 26 years old. Rest in peace to Vaughn, a man who came from nothing, a man who turned his reality into art, a man who, by all accounts, was loyal to his people in ways that went beyond music or money. His death left a hole in Chicago's street and music community that has never fully healed. And stories like this one, stories about loyalty, about ransom calls, about men who showed up when it mattered, are part of how his legacy continues to be told. Lil Durk continues to carry that legacy forward, continues to make music, continues to build, and continues to carry the weight of being the last man standing from a generation that lost too many too soon. For OTF Dede, surviving a situation like the one described is not just physical survival. It's psychological, it's spiritual. Coming out of a situation where you were held, humiliated, and used as leverage, and then having to return to the same world where it happened, requires a kind of strength that most people will never have to find. Street stories are complicated. They don't have clean heroes or clean villains. They have people, human beings, making decisions under impossible conditions, in environments that most of the world will never see or understand. The story of OTF Dede's kidnapping is one of those stories. Dark, disturbing, real. A reminder of what loyalty looks like when it's tested. A reminder of the price people pay for proximity to power. And a reminder that, in the world these men come from, survival itself is a victory. If this story meant something to you, if it made you think, made you feel, made you want to understand Chicago and its people better, then drop a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel. Share this with somebody who needs to hear it. And in the comments, tell me, what part of this story hit different for you? We'll see you on the next one.